They convicted Daniel Wexler of murdering his business partner in 1994. Then, 22 years later, a records clerk digging through a condemned annex found a sealed manila folder marked not for discovery. A gunshot residue report the jury never saw. And it didn't just cast doubt. It proved the state's own lab tested the wrong hands. The official story was simple, and for 2 decades it held. Daniel Wexler and Marcus Bell ran a print shop together on Delancey Street. On the night of March 9, 1994, Bell was found shot once in the chest in the back office. Wexler had motive, a buyout dispute worth $60,000 and no alibi. Prosecutors told the jury that gunshot residue on Wexler's right hand placed the weapon in his grip. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. He got life without parole. For 22 years, that was the file. Closed, shelved, forgotten by everyone except the man serving the sentence, who kept writing letters nobody answered. The folder surfaced in 2016 during a routine digitization audit of the County Crime Lab's archive, which was being relocated after water damage condemned the old annex. Inside was a supplemental serology and residue report, dated March 14, 1994, 5 days after the shooting, 3 weeks before trial. It was signed by the original analyst, a technician named Ruth Halloran, and it broke the residue results into 2 separate swab kits, one labeled subject, one labeled decedent. The version presented at trial only ever referenced the subject kit. This second document showed both. And on the decedent's right hand, Marcus Bell's own hand, the particle count for barium and antimony was nearly identical to Wexler's, which meant either both men had fired a weapon that night, or the lab had contaminated its own samples and never told anyone. Here's why that detail breaks the conviction rather than just complicating it. Gunshot residue evidence only means something if it isolates one person. The prosecutor's closing argument leaned on a single sentence: the particles on his hands tell you what his mouth won't. But if the victim's hands carried the same signature, the state's own science undercuts its own theory. Either Bell fired a gun that night too, raising the specter of a struggle the trial never explored, or the samples were cross-contaminated during collection, which would mean the residue evidence was worthless from the start. The trial transcript shows defense counsel asking, at one point, whether the victim had been tested at all. The prosecution answered no. That answer was false, or at least incomplete, and nobody caught it. Why did this report sit in a folder marked not for discovery for 22 years? Because in 1994, the County Crime Lab operated under an internal policy never formally written into the discovery statute. That supplemental analyst notes were considered working papers, not evidence, unless a prosecutor chose to introduce them. The decision of what counted as a working paper belonged entirely to the lab director, a man named Everett Prout, who signed off on the trial exhibit list himself. Prout retired in 2003. He was never deposed about the second kit because nobody outside the lab knew it existed. The annex where the file sat wasn't even part of the courthouse. It was a separate leased building 3 blocks away, and it had no subpoena history. Nobody had ever had a legal reason to search it, because nobody knew there was anything left to find. But the residue report wasn't the strangest part. Buried in the same folder was a chain of custody logs showing the decedent's swab kit had been checked out and returned by a lab technician on March 11th, 2 days before the supplemental report was written, and a full week before the defense's own expert was allowed limited access to the primary samples. The log gave no reason for the checkout. No case number, no requesting officer, just initials. EP, the same initials as the lab director. Whatever happened to that swab kit during those 48 hours, it happened before anyone outside the building had permission to look, and it happened at the hand of the one man with total discretion over what the jury would eventually see. For the conviction, the implications are severe. If the evidence was contaminated, Wexler's residue results are meaningless too, and the case collapses to circumstantial motive alone. If it wasn't contaminated, someone else in that room fired a weapon that night, and the state buried the one document that said so. Either way, the same person benefited from silence. The lab director who controlled the paperwork, retired now, unreachable, his own explanation never on the record. Wexler's appeal is pending on the strength of that single folder. But the county has never explained why a report proving cross-contamination, or a second shooter, sat unread for 22 years in a building nobody thought to search. And nobody has ever asked Everett Prout under oath what those initials on the checkout log were doing there.